The Corrivian Empire was vast, stretching across hundreds of star systems, its power unmatched by any other civilization. At the heart of this empire sat its ruler, Empress Zara. She was the epitome of grace, strength, and wisdom, and her beauty was said to rival the stars themselves. But there was one thing that set her apart from all others. Her heart was cold, untouched by the emotions that ruled so many other beings. For centuries, suitors from across the galaxy had traveled to her world, hoping to win her favor. Warriors, scholars, diplomats, and even royalty. All had offered their service, their admiration, and their hearts to her, but none had ever come close to earning her affection. The idea of love, to Zara, was a weakness. Her people admired her for her coldness and her ability to rule without being swayed by personal desires. She had no time for romance, no use for lovers or alliances built on affection. She had built her empire through strength and intellect, not through passion. Zara's reputation was well known. Her people adored her, but they also feared her. She had built her empire with an iron fist, ruling with logic and precision. Those who crossed her, or even appeared to be a threat, were swiftly dealt with. Many whispered that her heart was as cold as the frozen moons that orbited her home planet. There were rumors that no one, not even the greatest warriors or the most skilled diplomats, had ever come close to winning her favor. She was untouchable. And yet, despite her icy demeanor, there were those who still hoped for a chance. Every year, there were new suitors, strong, handsome, and powerful beings from all over the galaxy, each one eager to be the one to break through Zara's defenses. They would arrive with great fanfare, bringing gifts and performing grand gestures in hopes of impressing the Empress. They tried everything, from writing songs in her honor to giving her rare jewels from distant stars. Some even offered to serve her for eternity, promising loyalty and devotion. But Zara never wavered. She would meet them, listen to their speeches, and watch their performances with a cold, calculating gaze. She would listen to their offers with a polite but indifferent smile. In the end, each one was dismissed. None could move her, none could make her see them as more than mere distractions. She was far too focused on her empire, on maintaining control over every aspect of her reign, to be bothered by the whims of a suitor. To the outside world, Zara's rejection of every suitor was a matter of pride. She was a symbol of power, an example that emotions had no place in leadership. She was untouchable, a being of unmatched strength and intelligence. But in her private chambers, when the doors were closed and the weight of her crown felt heavier than usual, Zara couldn't help but wonder, was there something more to life than ruling? Was there something more to her than just the cold ruler the galaxy saw? But even as she questioned herself, she remained resolute. Emotions were a distraction. Relationships were a weakness. She had never allowed anyone to get close enough to her to find out the truth. And yet, deep inside, there was a part of her that longed for connection, a part that resented the cold, lonely path she had chosen. But that part was buried deep, never to be shown. Zara ruled her empire with an unshakable resolve, pushing away any thoughts of what might lie beyond her duties. No one could touch her, no one could break her heart. Or so she thought. The Corrivian Empire was accustomed to receiving visitors from all corners of the galaxy. Powerful beings, majestic in form and mind, would come, hoping to catch the Empress's eye. But this time, something different arrived at the gates of Zara's palace. A human. The idea of a human even setting foot on Corrivia was laughable to many. Humans were considered primitive, fragile creatures compared to the superior races of the galaxy. Their technology was still developing, their empires young and small, and their understanding of the universe nowhere near the grandeur of the Corrivians. To the elite and powerful, the idea of a human standing in the presence of an empress seemed absurd. John was nothing like the other suitors who had come before. He wasn't a mighty warrior or a wise scholar. He didn't offer jewels from forgotten worlds or recite ancient poems of lost civilizations. Instead, John was just a man from a small, remote planet called Earth. He had been thrust into this world of powerful alien empires by accident, an unintended consequence of a diplomatic mission gone wrong. And now he found himself standing on the grand steps of the Corrivian palace, unsure of what would come next. The guards eyed him with suspicion as he entered the palace grounds. His clothes were simple, his posture unremarkable. His very presence felt out of place among the towering statues and gold-drenched halls. But it wasn't his appearance that would cause a stir. It was his calmness, his quiet confidence, and his eyes. There was something in them that made him stand apart from everyone else. His gaze was steady and unwavering, unlike any other being the Corrivians had ever encountered. The Empress would notice that. John had no intentions of impressing anyone. He had no grand speeches prepared or intricate gifts to offer. He had only come because he had been sent, an emissary of peace, of understanding, a human with nothing to lose but everything to gain. As John entered the throne room, all eyes turned toward him. There she sat, Empress Sara, her cold eyes fixated on him. Her beauty was otherworldly, her presence overwhelming. Every part of the room seemed to dim in comparison to the radiant power she exuded. But there was something else, something almost imperceptible. In the depths of her gaze, there was a flicker of curiosity. "You are human." Her voice was smooth, yet sharp, the words cutting through the air like a blade. Her eyes narrowed, as though studying him. She had seen countless species before, but this human, he was different. John stood tall, unshaken by the weight of her presence. "Yes, Empress, I am from Earth. I come in peace," he said, his voice steady, though his heart raced with nerves. He had prepared for many situations, but facing the Empress herself was something else entirely. The Empress leaned forward slightly, her gaze never leaving his. She had heard the words peace countless times from suitors, diplomats, and rulers alike. Yet none had ever dared approach her as John did, without fear, without pretense. He didn't bow before her, didn't speak of admiration for her power or beauty. He simply stood as an equal. "You come to offer peace?" Jera asked, her voice laced with skepticism. "What can a human possibly offer to an empire such as mine?" John's mind raced. He had to find the right words, but he knew there was no grand gesture, no impossible promise, that could win her favor. There was only one thing he could offer: himself. "I offer understanding," he said, his voice calm yet filled with sincerity. "Not as a conqueror, not as a diplomat. Just as a man who wants to understand your people, your empire, and perhaps you." Jera studied him closely. His words were simple, but they carried weight. The room fell silent as she looked him over. No grandeur, no extravagant promises. He wasn't like the others. And for the first time in centuries, she felt something stir inside her. A curiosity, a question she had long buried. Could this human be the one to break through the icy barrier she had built around herself? The Empress stood, her figure towering over him, her gaze intense. "You believe you can understand me?" she asked, her voice both challenging and intrigued. "I believe I can try," John replied, his eyes meeting hers without flinching. Zara's cold heart was notorious throughout the galaxy. Many had tried to win her favor, to crack the armor around her, but no one had ever succeeded. Yet there was something different about this human. He wasn't interested in power, in wealth, or even in her empire. He simply wanted to understand her. And for some reason, that intrigued her. For the first time in a long time, the Empress felt something stir deep within her, a feeling she couldn't easily name, something foreign, yet strangely familiar. As John stood before her, with no grandeur, no suit of armor, and no promises of great wealth, Jera began to wonder, could this human truly be different? Could he be the one to break the walls she had so carefully built around her heart? And as she watched him, her mind whirled with possibilities. She had rejected countless suitors in the past, but none had ever made her question everything the way this simple human had. The grand throne room was silent, the air heavy with the weight of anticipation. Empress Sierra stood tall, her regal form casting a shadow over the marble floor as she regarded John. The human had not flinched, not once, under her piercing gaze. His calm demeanor only deepened her curiosity. How could a mere human, one so insignificant in the grand tapestry of the universe, stand so unfazed in her presence? Her eyes narrowed slightly, studying him closely. He was neither extraordinary nor ordinary in the way the others had been. There was no arrogance in his posture, no signs of fear, just an unwavering determination, a quiet confidence that she couldn't ignore. The Empress had seen countless beings try to win her favor, each one presenting their grandeur, their power, their intelligence. Yet none had ever held her attention the way John did. "I have rejected countless suitors from across the galaxy," Jera said, her voice cold and authoritative. "Why do you think you, a mere human, would be any different?" John's heart raced, but he refused to show it. His gaze met hers steadily. "Because I'm not here to conquer or impress you, Empress. I'm not here to make promises or seek power. I'm here to listen, to understand your world, your people, and you." Jara's eyebrow arched. The room buzzed with an unspoken tension. The other courtiers, those who had once been part of her inner circle, watched in disbelief. They had never seen the Empress speak so openly with anyone, especially not a human. Her words were always sharp, dismissing. And yet here she was, allowing this human to speak with her as though they were equals. "You would try to understand me," Jera repeated, her voice betraying a hint of amusement. "You, who cannot even comprehend the vastness of my empire, the intricacies of my people. What makes you think you have the capacity for such understanding?" John didn't hesitate. "Because I'm not here to judge. I'm here to learn." His words were simple but filled with sincerity. There was no boast, no false bravado, just a genuine desire to connect. For a long moment, Jera said nothing, simply watching him with a mixture of intrigue and disbelief. He hadn't come to flaunt his knowledge or charm her with gifts. He wasn't offering anything she hadn't heard before. Yet there was something unspoken in his presence that was impossible to ignore. "Many have tried before you," Jera said slowly, her voice now laced with a sharp edge. "They all failed. Every one of them thought they could win me over with promises or power. They thought they could change me, manipulate me into bending to their will. You're no different." John took a step forward, closing the distance between them, but his movement wasn't in arrogance. It was an invitation. "I'm not trying to change you, Empress. I'm asking you to see me as I am, just as I see you, not as a ruler or an unreachable legend, but as a person who has seen the pain of loneliness." Jara's expression flickered for just a second, her cold exterior faltering. Loneliness. The word hit her harder than she expected. She had never allowed anyone to get close enough to her to understand that part of herself. Loneliness was a feeling she had buried deep within, beneath layers of power and responsibility. But this human, this one who didn't fear her, who didn't bow before her, had found a crack in her armor. Her icy demeanor returned, quickly suppressing any hint of vulnerability. "I do not need your pity, human," she said, her voice firm. "And I do not require your understanding. I am the Empress. I need no one." John looked at her, and for a brief moment, the room seemed to grow still, as if time itself held its breath. "I'm not offering pity, Empress, just a chance, to see if we can learn something new together." Jara's gaze hardened again, but now there was something else beneath it, something she couldn't quite place. Was it a spark of curiosity? Or something deeper, something she had tried so long to bury? She couldn't tell. She had spent years building her empire and keeping herself distant from the world, guarding her emotions with a cold, unyielding shell. But John was different. For the first time in years, Jara found herself at a crossroads. Could she continue rejecting everyone who sought her, or was there a possibility, however small, that this human could offer something more than the others had? "You are bold," she finally said, her voice low and even. "But do not mistake my patience for weakness. If you truly wish to understand me, to stand before me as an equal, then you must first prove yourself." John nodded slowly, not in submission, but in acceptance of the challenge. "I will. In time." Jera studied him, her sharp eyes searching for any sign of weakness. But all she saw was sincerity. It was a rare thing, and she found herself unwilling to dismiss it. "Then prove it," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Show me that you are not like the others. Show me that you can stand beside me, not beneath me. Only then will you understand what you seek." As John nodded in understanding, the first real crack in Jera's cold heart formed. The Empress had never allowed anyone to challenge her like this, and yet, somehow, this human had managed to do so. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she was willing to find out. The days that followed were tense, filled with the weight of unspoken challenges. Jera, Empress of the Corinthian Empire, had never been one to show weakness, and now she found herself standing at a strange crossroads. John, a mere human, had not only dared to question her, but he had also made her feel something she had long buried: doubt. But doubt was a dangerous thing, especially for someone like her. To prove his worth, Jera had devised a trial, a test that would push John to his limits, both mentally and physically. The Corinthian Arena, a grand structure built for combat and challenge, was where this test would take place. It was a place where warriors had fought for glory, a place where only the strongest had survived. Jera had no intention of showing mercy, not even to a human. John stood at the entrance of the arena, his heart beating steadily as the cold, stone walls loomed ahead. The massive gates groaned open, revealing the vast expanse of the arena. The sand beneath his boots seemed to shift, as if the very ground was watching him, waiting for him to falter. The audience, made up of Corinthian nobles and warriors, filled the high stands, their eyes fixed on the human who dared to challenge the Empress's will. Jera watched from her elevated throne, her eyes sharp, studying every movement he made. She had seen warriors fight here, seen the strongest fall and the weakest rise. Would this human be different? "Prepare yourself," a Corinthian soldier said, handing John a simple weapon, a sword forged from the hardest material in the galaxy. "You will face the Guardian. Defeat it, and you will have proven your strength." John took the sword, its weight unfamiliar in his hand. He had fought in his life, but never against creatures like the ones that roamed the galaxy. He had seen the Corinthians' might firsthand, the power they wielded. And now he was about to face a creature that could easily crush him with a single strike. But the stakes were high, and his determination was stronger than fear. He stepped forward into the arena, his gaze steady, though his mind raced. The Guardian, an enormous, terrifying beast, half mechanical, half organic, loomed ahead. Its eyes glowed with an eerie light, its massive claws scraping the stone beneath it. The crowd's roar grew louder as the creature growled, ready to pounce. The air was thick with tension, and Jera's cold eyes never left John. The Guardian lunged. John moved instinctively, sidestepping its razor-sharp claws, his heart pounding in his chest. The sword in his hand felt like a weight, but he held onto it with all his might. He wasn't just fighting for his life. He was fighting for a chance to prove to the Empress, to the galaxy, that he could be more than just a weak, insignificant human. The Guardian's claws slashed through the air, narrowly missing John's side. He darted backward, his feet light on the ground, staying just out of its reach. His mind raced, trying to find a way to defeat the beast. The creature was relentless, its power unmatched. John was quick, but it was clear that the Guardian had the advantage in strength and size. But John wasn't about to give up. He thought of his home, his people, and the promise he had made to himself. He wasn't just here to survive. He was here to show that even the most unlikely of beings could stand their ground. With a surge of determination, John closed the distance between him and the Guardian. He aimed for its weak spot, a small opening in its armored chest, It was a dangerous move, but if he didn't take it, he wouldn't stand a chance. His sword connected with the creature's chest, the impact echoing through the arena. The guardian howled in pain, stumbling back. For a moment, the arena was silent. Then, with a final powerful thrust, John drove the sword deep into the guardian's chest. The creature fell to the ground with a deafening crash, its massive body collapsing onto the sand. The crowd erupted into cheers, but John barely registered the noise. His body was trembling with exhaustion, his heart still racing. He had done it. He had won. But it wasn't just the fight that mattered. It was the look in Jara's eyes as she watched him. For the first time, there was something different in her gaze. Something deeper. Respect. John lowered the sword, breathing heavily, his body bruised and battered from the fight. He had proven his strength, but he knew the true test was still ahead of him. Jara's cold heart had only just begun to thaw, and it would take more than just one victory to win her favor. But as he stood in the arena, the cheers of the crowd fading into the background, he couldn't help but feel that for the first time, he was no longer invisible. He had their attention, and he had hers. Jara's voice echoed through the arena, cold as ever, but with a subtle hint of admiration. "You have passed the first test, human," she said, her gaze never leaving his. "But the real challenge begins now." The victory in the arena had been a turning point, but it was far from the end. As John stood there, his chest heaving from exhaustion, he could feel the eyes of the Corrivian elite upon him. Eyes that had once dismissed him as nothing more than a curious human, but now he was something more. The crowd's cheers had died down, but the stillness in the air felt even more intense. Jara, Empress of the Corrivian Empire, had made her thoughts clear with her words, but her eyes told a different story. John had passed the first test, yes, but the path ahead was unclear. He knew the Empress wasn't one to hand out favors easily. She had only allowed him this chance because of her curiosity, a curiosity he could feel growing each time their eyes met. The battle he had fought was a small victory compared to the larger challenge of understanding the heart of the Empress herself. As the soldiers approached to remove the fallen guardian from the arena, John slowly walked toward the center, wiping the sweat and dirt from his brow. The cut on his arm stung, but he barely noticed it. His focus was on Jara. There was no joy in her expression, no obvious approval, but there was a subtle shift, a slight softening in the way she watched him. "Not bad, human," she said from her throne, her voice cool but laced with something else. Respect, maybe. It was impossible to tell for certain. She had always been an enigma. Her emotions veiled behind layers of composure and control. But now, after watching him fight, something had changed. She was no longer dismissing him as just another suitor. He had earned a place in her world, even if she wasn't yet ready to admit it. John didn't allow himself to feel pride. Instead, he simply nodded in acknowledgement, his gaze not wavering from hers. "It's not over yet, Empress. I'm not here to prove I can fight. I'm here to prove I can be more than what others see." Zara was silent for a long while, and John could feel the weight of her thoughts. The power in the room shifted again, as though the conversation itself was pushing against something deep within her. Finally, she turned to face him, her eyes clear, her expression unreadable. "You're right about one thing," she said, her voice low and measured. "I've never allowed myself to be vulnerable, to trust anyone, to let anyone see me for who I truly am. But if you think you can do that, if you truly think you can change me, then you're more foolish than I thought." A small, knowing smile tugged at the corner of her lips, the first real smile he had seen from her. "But I will admit," she said, stepping closer, her gaze unwavering, "you are the first to make me consider that maybe, just maybe, I can be something else." John met her gaze, a quiet sense of hope rising within him. This was only the beginning. He didn't know where this path would lead, or if he would succeed in changing her, but he knew one thing for sure. She was no longer a distant, unreachable ruler. She was someone he could reach. and that was enough to keep him fighting. The silence between them was heavy, but it was different from the cold silence they had shared earlier. It was filled with unspoken words, a tension that hung in the air, thick with anticipation. John could feel it, the delicate shift in the atmosphere. Jera had made her stand clear. She wasn't going to easily change, and yet she had acknowledged something, even if she wasn't ready to admit it fully. John stood slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm not here to break you down, Jera. I'm here because I believe we both deserve more than this constant battle, this distance between us." He said it as much for himself as he did for her. The vulnerability was creeping in, a real connection forming, and it terrified him just as much as it intrigued him. Jera's eyes narrowed, but this time, there was no edge in her gaze. Her usual defensive posture was slipping away, and for the first time, she seemed almost uncertain. Her shoulders relaxed, and her hand, which had been clenched at her side, opened slightly. "You think I want more than this?" she whispered, almost as if she were talking to herself. "You think I want to be vulnerable, John? You think I want to let someone in?" John nodded, his voice steady but filled with an underlying sincerity. "Yes, I do. Because deep down, I know that even someone like you wants more than just the throne, the power, the constant isolation. You want to feel something real, something you can't control. You just need to trust someone enough to give it a chance." Jera stepped back, her eyes searching his face, as if looking for any sign that he was lying. But she found none. There was no trickery in his words, no hidden agenda. Just truth, and that truth, however simple, seemed to weigh on her like the very crown she wore. "Trust," she repeated quietly. "It's a dangerous thing to give, and it's even more dangerous to take." John didn't flinch. "I don't want your trust all at once. I don't expect you to open up everything to me right now. But what I do want is to show you that you don't have to do everything alone. You don't have to hide behind your strength forever." Jera remained still, her gaze never wavering from him. There was no immediate response, but John could see the subtle shift in her eyes, the faintest flicker of something human, the part of her that had been buried for so long, locked away beneath the mask of the Empress. She took a deep breath, as if steeling herself for something. "I've never let anyone close enough to see me," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I've ruled this empire with a cold heart, John. And maybe that's why I've survived all this time. It's why I've never faltered, never been weak. If I let you in, if I let anyone in, I'm afraid of what will happen. I've seen the destruction weakness can cause." John took a step closer, his heart pounding in his chest, but his voice calm. "You're not weak for feeling, Jera. You're not weak for trusting. You don't have to be invincible all the time. You can be both, a leader and a person. And I'm willing to show you that it's possible." Jera looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable, but there was a faint shift in her posture, the slightest crack in the armor she had worn for so long. "I don't know if I can change," she whispered, "but maybe I can try." It was the smallest of steps, but it was enough. Enough for John to see the possibility of something more between them. He had never expected her to open up completely in a single conversation, but this moment, this acceptance that she might allow herself to change, was more than he had hoped for. John gave her a small, reassuring smile. "You don't have to change everything, Jera. Just take one step. We'll take it together." Jera didn't smile in return, but there was a softness in her gaze that hadn't been there before. She nodded once, the faintest sign that she was willing to explore this new path, a path where she wasn't just the Empress, the ruler of an empire, but something more, someone who could experience the things she had always kept at arm's length: vulnerability, connection, and maybe even love. "I've been alone for so long," she said quietly, her voice betraying a rare hint of sorrow. "But maybe I don't have to be." The weight of her words hung between them, a shared understanding. They both knew the road ahead would not be easy. There would be moments of doubt, of fear, but for the first time, they were no longer enemies, no longer distant figures. They were two people standing at the edge of something new. And with that, the door to change, however slowly it would open, was finally cracked.